Hey everyone, David here, and I've got some exciting news to share. I've decided to write a book, and I've entitled it Psychosocial Hazards Are Real. The book is intended to help clarify the fact that psychological safety cannot be achieved without paying attention to the psychosocial hazards people are being exposed to. Despite how much individuals might be interested in treating others with kindness, dignity, and respect, many cultures are so full of psychosocial traps that no psychological health and safety effort can ultimately succeed. But to address psychosocial hazards, you first have to know what they are, and you have to have some idea what to do to address them. Though the book won't be 100% complete until the spring of 2025, I'd like to share a unique opportunity to reserve a copy during the book presale campaign. The campaign will run from September 16th to October 18th, 2024. This will be an opportunity to get one of the first copies of the book, tickets to the book launch event, and other opportunities to learn more about psychosocial hazards. For more information, you can go to my personal LinkedIn or Facebook page, or the LinkedIn, Facebook, or webpage for ID2 Solutions. Don't miss out on this unique opportunity. Now, back to this episode of the podcast. Ongoing and higher education is where people not only build the academic skills they'll need to be productive, but they are also in many ways being groomed psychologically for various roles in the workplace. We'll talk about the importance of psychological health and safety in ongoing and higher education up next on this episode of the Psych, Health, and Safety USA podcast. From Flourish DX, this is the Psych, Health, and Safety USA podcast. As workplace mental health has become a global priority, there's a greater focus on addressing psychosocial hazards. Each week, we look at psychological safety from an occupational health and safety perspective. Let's talk psychological health and safety. Welcome to this week's Psych, Health, and Safety USA podcast. I'm your host, Dr. I. David Daniels, and I want to thank you for tuning in. Each week, we seek to increase awareness of the importance of psychological health and safety by learning from the lived experiences, research, and expertise of our guests, as well as advocating strategies to reduce harm and minimize vulnerability to psychosocial hazards in the American workplace. So psychological health and safety is crucial for college students for several reasons. Mental well-being is one of them. So college life can be stressful with academic pressures, social dynamics, and possibly being away from home for the very first time. Maintaining a good psychological health and safety culture helps students manage stress and anxiety. Mental health significantly impacts cognitive functions like concentration, memory, and problem solving. Students with good psychological health are more likely to perform well academically. Healthy psychological well-being helps students build and maintain positive relationships with peers, faculty, and family. It also fosters a supportive and inclusive campus environment. Ensuring psychological health and safety helps prevent issues like depression, substance use, suicidal thoughts. Colleges with robust mental health support systems can identify and assist students in need more effectively. And inclusion. So promoting psychological health and safety creates an inclusive and supportive campus culture where all students can thrive regardless of their background or personal challenges. So we're going to have a conversation today. Often I get to meet people for the first time, but actually I'm going to be talking with a friend. Someone that we've developed a friendship over a period of time, and he is really into students and the student experience. One of the few people I've ever met who their livelihood is around making sure that the experience of a person in education is a positive and supportive one. So let's get to it with an introduction of my guest by my guest with this question. Who is Andy Kearney?
So, As I was preparing that question, and then I first stepped into the podcast studio, the first thing that struck me was this sign that's in your shelf that says "Think outside the box." And I would say that would be a summary of who I am. I've always been this out of the box thinker, coloring outside of the box with every imaginable color of a crayon you could think of, because that's been my upbringing. So I'm a first generation college student, and you could say a semi first generation American. I grew up very much under the influence of my Arab mother and Hungarian grandmother, both who immigrated to this country, both who came not speaking any English. Lived in Beirut for a short period of time before coming back to the United States. And so, I grew up in a time, and maybe I think we're somewhat similar in our generational experience. Generationally, we are. So, I grew up at a time where psychological health and safety wasn't even a thought. People didn't even think about that. So, I grew up under lots of prejudices, being in a semi-rural area in Georgia, of the type of household that we came from. And so the thought of having psychological safety in a school, much less outside of the school, was just very foreign. You just dealt with it, and some of those things were things that you carry on even beyond going into school. So going back to who I am, I think I'm someone who has um, persevered and been resilient despite the conditions around me. I've always had a loving home with loving parents, etc. But I always had to really fight to prove to the world, to a business, to a school, who I was. And I think that that's carried on. So those are some of the positive things. And then I would say also the part of who Andy Kearney is a result of the buildup that I had growing up as a kid, being subject to a lot of prejudices. Um, and it wasn't always doom and gloom. There was a lot of love in the family as well. But I had to learn to fend for things on my own because my parents didn't know how to manage those types of experiences, because they weren't, my mother, I was really around my mother and grandmother, weren't from here. So that kind of summarizes who I am. I think I've persevered and I've been resilient to find my own path and journey. And I've had some incredible people that have surrounded me and given me lots of love and encouragement along the way in the school system, at the university, and beyond. So I would say that summarizes who I am.
Right on, right on. Well, we're gonna touch on some of those points in our conversation. One more rather standard question that I ask everyone who comes on is, what does psychological health and safety mean to you?
So I was prepared for an answer, which was going to be it's the total mental and health and well being of a person or student, and their surroundings, so to have that sense of safety and inclusivity. And I believe in that. I want to add to that. And before we started the podcast, I was sharing with you a story. So after the initial webinar that you and I did a follow up webinar with just students. And these were students from around the world. And actually, all of them were international students. Even the students that I had interviewed that were in the U.S. came from an international background. But these students that were on, some of them were from Beirut, Lebanon. And so, as they were talking about student success and their experience, these students also have lived for a large part of their lives in war, or not knowing when war would break out, not knowing if a bomb was going to go off, if they crossed the street and went into their own school, were they safe? Were their friends going to be safe? Were they going to find out something when they got back home? Was their home going to even be there? So that puts a new level of psychological health and safety, to the definition. And to me, underscores the critical importance of the things that people can control, the environments that can be controlled, like inside a school, being so acutely aware of the importance of psychological health and safety, because there are things that cannot be controlled once you step foot outside of that surrounding. So to me, that created another level of psychological health and safety.
Okay, first rabbit trail here, because as you were describing that, it caused me to think about uh, the fact that though you interviewed international students, uh, I I believe that you could interview some students that were born and raised here in the United States that would have a very similar kind of expression. And I'll tell you, I'm probably one of them. As I'm finishing up this book, one of the stories I tell in the book has to do with my upbringing in school. So I was born and raised in Seattle. In the second grade, the school that was 2.5 blocks from my house got shut down. I was put on a bus to go to a school 5 miles away. 5 miles isn't far now, but when you're a third grader, it seems like you're going to the end of the planet. And when I got there and got off the bus, virtually nobody there looked like me. Virtually nobody. And the story I tell in the book is the fact that my first safety experience was as a crossing guard at that school. But to become a crossing guard, I had to do something different than everybody else because they'd never considered having kids wanting to be crossing guards who came on a bus and couldn't walk home later. So the activity, the school bus would leave me. So they said initially, they said, you can't be a crossing guard. And so and I think there were probably some other of us kind of raised a fit a little bit and said, well, how come we can't? And they figured out a way. So here's the connection. They figured out a way. Well, why don't we just have another bus for the kids who do activities? Matter of fact, all the kids do activities if they do, and they live a little bit further so they can participate. And that allowed me to have my first opportunity that was safety related as a crossing guard in the third grade. So again, if you think about the kids who are in K through 12 or who are in college, uh, the kids who are at Virginia Tech when somebody came on the campus with a gun, so think about all of these things going on in the United States, and an argument could be made as to whether or not we can control them, whether or not we want to. I think it's the latter. I think we're just aren't really concerned about it that much. So we don't really do anything about it because a lot of countries are. But they have to wonder about whether or not they're going to get shot heading back to their dorm or whether or not they're going to get robbed or something negative happening on the way back to their dorm. And then you have folks working on the institution who are good folks, but they don't have the kind of skill. I won't say. I have folks who work in higher education right now, and the folks that are in charge of the institution, they don't have safety backgrounds. They don't think about this type of stuff. I mean, they just don't. I mean, I could go to any college campus in the United States and share some things with them that they probably haven't heard because they don't know. So again, you really got me thinking about how important this is when you share that example. But again, before I go too far off the reservation here, well, that's really kind of pejorative. I shouldn't say that. Before I go too far in a direction that we may not have planned to go, because I don't want to be pejorative talking about the places that our native population live. Anyway, so what stimulated your interest in higher education as a thing? So a lot of people go to college, but then some don't ever go back. But it's really become a passion for you. So how did that happen?
So I went to school at Georgia State University, and I sought comfort in an urban, diverse environment because that's what I was used to. And I didn't know anything else besides that. So there were different institutions that I had the opportunity to go to, but I wasn't comfortable. And one, I didn't have any of the understanding of like financial aid and you have to do this and that because my parents didn't know that either. So Georgia State was such a safe place for me, and it was such an incredibly diverse place, and it really inspired my desire to want to get involved. And I got very, very actively involved in so many different organizations. And those things led to my appreciation and love of higher ed. So I started off in student life and development, did a little bit of academic advising. I traveled for almost 2 years for my national fraternity. I was involved in a fraternity, and then that led me to come back to work at Georgia State. And so it was that path, and the desire to really want to help start lives or continue to shape lives that put in me the desire to want to create experience for people. So in my pathway, although it's been the technology side, I've really clung to the creating experiences for people and bringing the human element of the experience, because so often we think about, oh, we're going to evolve in technology and technology will do this, or we're going to create a new product or a new service, and all those things are important, but it's the human aspect of how we make people feel and the environment around them that really holds true to the essence of an experience. And one thing I'll mention, what you just said is so critically important, and that is that a lot of times, in whether it's at the institution or other workforces, other workplaces, they are trained on certain aspects of how to appropriately onboard an employee and the semantics of it and the transactions, but they lack the education on the psychological safety, as you just said. It's so true. If something were to happen, or a crisis, or even just general safety issues with among between and among people on a campus, my question is, are people fully trained on how to handle that? The answer is probably no.
Yeah, yeah, no doubt. I mean, again, we have some of what many would argue are the best institutions on the face of the planet. But the thing that they lack often is enough focus, to your point, on the human beings in the institution. And again, we're talking about the students here today. That's most of our conversation. But I'd argue it starts with the staff, because if the faculty and staff of an institution are overly stressed, are under almost attacked by particularly the public institutions, under attack by politicians and that type of thing, it's very difficult to then turn around and create a safe environment for the student. How are they possibly going to do that? And I say this about every single organization on the planet that says that they have customers or clients or they serve other people. You can't skip over the staff or the people that provide the service directly, treat them any way you want, and expect that's not going to bleed over to the customers, clients, students, or whoever. You just can't. We're human beings. And if I've got some department chair who's yelling at me all the time, and I'm expected to go before students and paste a smile on my face, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. It really doesn't. Now, in many circumstances, it goes back to what we were suggesting before. People have come up in that environment themselves, and they will not paint outside the box. They're going to do what they're told. They're going to follow the rules because the culture is such that they're afraid not to. They're afraid not to stay in the lines. They're afraid not to follow the rules. They're afraid. So there's this culture of fear sometimes. You've got the big bad president or trustees or department head or whoever who's world renowned as X. And behind the scenes, they're just kind of a terror. They're not a person that people even want to be around, but they're afraid. So that gets passed along to students. It's as I said, in the opening. So we're grooming more people to be afraid, grooming more people to take abuse and mistreatment. So when they go out in the workforce, they'll just kind of go along with it. And I think that there are some of us, and you're certainly on the list of people going like, nah, we shouldn't be doing that. We should be trying to help folks figure out what is safe and effective for them and taking that part of themselves so we can affect the business world, so we can affect these other organizations. So what got you thinking about students specifically? Because again, there are a lot of folks who are in higher ed who are simply, and this may come across as pejorative, but it's not intended to be, kind of corporate shills. I'm here. We got to get more students. Do we need them to pay their tuition? It's the kind of mechanical. We have to have the thing, whether it be, the athletic programs or the way the students are recruited or who gets the scholarships and who doesn't. It's this really mechanical kind of thing that doesn't think that much about the student at all. It thinks about the money that the student brings with them. So, how did you start caring so much about students?
I think a lot of it came from my own experience, and I had a wonderful experience, but I had to really go out and seek and find that experience on my own, and find the people and the resources that could either help me or work with me. And so, as I began to move into the workforce and actually go to multiple college campuses, university campuses all over the world, um, and start doing my thing of training and the software and that side, I really started to look at the impacts of what I was doing, and it was always impacting the student. And so that is what really drove in me the desire to want to create a better experience for students, better than what I had, and even a better experience and a pathway for them before they even come into to the college or university setting. That's what fueled my desire, because a lot of times, and you hit the nail on the head, a lot of times we worry about, okay, well, what do we need to do to get students in the door? Like, we're going to have these campaigns, we're going to recruit students. Okay, so we recruit them. How do we make sure, and you've brought this up before, that we actually practice what we've preached? So we've told them all these things, now they're here. How are we going to steward them to make sure that we're going to uphold what we've told them? One final thing I'll mention that really just created even more of a passion with me is that, I've also worked with students that have some forms of impairment, whether they have a visual impairment, audio impairment, bound to a wheelchair. And it made me think, like, one day I was running late for something, and I was able to run, I was able to time something and run to get to my where I needed to be to actually get prepared for this meeting. And so as I sat down the previous week, I've been thinking about this other student. Well, a lot of times psychological health and safety is also understanding that students there are some students that have impairments, and they don't have some of the luxuries that we do to have that. I need to run quickly. I need, last minute planning. So I'm going to quickly Google something. And so technology has advanced, but those are also parts of the experiences that I'm passionate about, like the full inclusivity and connectedness, and making sure that all students have that path to excellence and an exceptional experience.
Yes, yes, yeah. As a society, uh, again, I'll probably have to focus this on the U.S. because that's the only place I've lived. But in the United States, we learned the lessons of scientific management well from Robert Taylor and others. That we have an entire societal system that's based on the manufacturing model, and it's the old, kind of uh, like they built cars to build the Model T. They're all this. We built them. They're all going to be the same color. They're all going to have the same size wheel. They're all going to have the same everything. And the people on the assembly line are just going to do one job. But we have all these systems that were built that way, and people that are just totally different. And those systems actually didn't work half bad when the only people who were in those systems were people who are familiar with those systems. And again, in our country, that typically means a cisgender white male, because that's, most of the systems were made that way. And as these systems have recognized the fact that, well, we need more workers, and they all can't be white, they all can't be cisgender, they all aren't going to be male, they all aren't going to be they all aren't going to have the same visual acuity. They aren't going to hear the same way. They're not going to have all these differences, but our systems are still kind of monochromatic, kind of almost robotic. And so, I mean, this is where the individual approach comes in is if I'm going to invite Andy to this thing, perhaps I should consider how Andy would feel safe in this thing, not bring him in and go like, well, what's the problem? I like it. How come you don't? How come you can't? You see what I mean? And again, this is not all. I feel the necessity to keep repeating this. This is not that people intend it to be this way. It is that they don't consider that doesn't work the same for everybody else. I say often, everything I do for me works perfectly, but it doesn't work perfectly for other people, and I can't even figure that out unless I become concerned. First of all, I have to care, and then I have to ask. What is Andy like? What is safe for him? What works for him? And then to the extent I can, try to find opportunities that will be safe for him.
That's exactly right. It is about a dialogue and really seeking to understand other people. And sometimes, we gloss over that. We just assume and don't ill intend, but because of the assumption, it has a bad effect on the other person, or it can have a bad effect on the other person.
Do you need more psych health and safety in your life? Then head over to the FlourishDX Academy for several free on-demand e-learning courses. If you're an internal professional, follow FlourishDX on Eventbrite to register for any of our free fortnightly interactive webinars. Our flagship professional practice program is also exclusively available for internal professionals. The 12-week course blends theory, applied practice, and interaction with other professionals through live lectures and a monthly community of practice session. Find out more about all these learning opportunities or inquire about a bespoke in-house training at the FlourishDX Academy. www.45003.org. Now back to this episode.
So in your experience and view, what are some of the, if you could give me a short list of some of the challenges that, students are facing. I mean, there are so many, but what are some of the ones that you see a lot of that the challenges that students face? And again, we're using that term both higher and ongoing education. So not just kids coming out of high school going to college, but adults going back to improve their skills, get another degree, what have you. That's another part of the conversation. So what are some of the challenges that students are facing?
So, as I look at all the different types of institutions that I've worked with, and I'll start with some of the non-traditional students, the students that they've been out in the workforce, or maybe they didn't have a chance at a younger age to go right into college or university. So some of these are single parents that are coming back and wanting to get a degree. Some of these are parents that have suffered from a reduction in force at their place of employment and are trying to get a certification of some sort. So, for me, that's one aspect of it, where the psychological health and safety is an unknown to that particular element of psychological health and safety is an unknown to the administrator, because these are students that are coming in with all these pressures of a child. Maybe the child is sick. What if I don't have health insurance because I don't have a job, and I just got enough financially to put myself through a couple of semesters of school. So those are elements that we see a lot more of. I think that COVID exacerbated psychological health and safety and well-being on college campuses, because for the first time you had students now that were having to be kind of more recluse away from people, and that created a lot of harbored emotions that now are just starting or have been coming out since COVID. And so institutions need to be aware of that. I think that the advances in technology, while have been good in some ways, have also had negative consequences where, just like as a child of, growing up in the 70s and 80s, The TV was sometimes our babysitter. Well, that turned into a cell phone, which has turned into a smart device and an iPad and all these other devices, where now students coming in, some of them have lacked the ability to express themselves outside of a device, to verbalize how they're feeling. And so that creates issues. And so those are elements of psychological health and safety. And I think also we see, when we look at certain places where campuses are, there still can be some elements of prejudices that come in from different areas of how people view students or assumptions that people have, and so that can still exist. The last thing I'll mention on this is, which has been very relatively new, a new trend, or new finding. And I talked a little bit about this, but you've got now students that have the visual impairments and the colorblind, for example, or just completely visually impaired or audio impaired, and there've always been services for that. But if you think about for example, delivering a PowerPoint presentation to someone, and that PowerPoint is in a certain color or font or graphic that a student can't read because they just have a visual impairment, that can harbor some psychological safety issues. So we have to be thinking about all of those things as students, are coming in to our institutions and on our campuses or our virtual campuses.
Yeah. Wow. So many thoughts, because everything that you described in terms of the challenges that students have coming onto a campus also exists when they go into the workforce. It's the same thing. It's the exact same situation. So again, it's another reason why, if we can have this conversation about psychological health and safety while folks are getting their education, that eventually we'll have leaders and administrators and supervisors and people in charge of things that will understand that concept such that it can be baked into to what they do. Because unfortunately, and I was sharing this with someone recently, unfortunately, here in the United States, our entire system of employment still has some of the remnants of the chattel slavery system. It does. As a matter of fact, I did some research a while ago, and I don't want to get into a lot of detail, but so in 1860, at least one of the pieces of research I did, it cost about $1,600 to buy a human being. That converts in current dollars to a little bit less than $60,000. I'd argue you can get human beings cheaper today than you could back in 1860. You can pay them, minimum wage, provide them no health care, control their very lives in terms of they have to be at work at 6 a.m. and don't get to leave till 8 or 10. They may or may not get additional pay. They may or may not have a way to get from one place to another. And it become so generational that they'll bring their kids up to do the same thing. So in some ways, what's really changed? But on the other hand, there is this kind of renewed focus by some, and I prefer to believe I'm in that camp, that say we should be building all of our institutions to serve the best interest of human beings. How good is it for human beings? And the better it is for human beings, making money's good for human beings too. It is. It's a good thing. And if we focused on that, on this, so again, you and I met when you were, doing something kind of outside of higher ed around customer experience. But it's the same thing. If we're focused on, I want to sell you something, and don't care how it makes you feel, you might buy it once, but you aren't going to become a client. You may be a customer. My youngest son, who's actually a student at Georgia State University as a non-traditional student, just like his dad did. I went back to school after I'd been out of high school for 10 years. So, but anyway, he sees this difference between a customer who will buy from me once and a client who have an ongoing relationship and focuses a lot on the experience of those who interact with his business. And I go like, I think more people should do it like that. We were creating the reason to have a long-term relationship.
Absolutely. And to your point, there's so many more businesses today than there were, especially on the technology side, than there were in the past. So there are so many opportunities for customers to change from one thing to another, from one product to another. And I've been a customer for a company, or a consumer rather, and I've seen how through the advances of technology, it's almost taken advantage of moving the person out of the way and just let the technology do the work, and how that makes me feel, because I don't want to sit the entire day to press one for this and two for that and three for that down the road. And I also appreciate being a person in technology. I appreciate AI, but I think, AI and machine-based learning, that has a place as well. But the thing that is missing that would turn me from a customer to a client is that person to person, human to human interaction. And those are things that technology can help enable, but it cannot replace. So I think those also go into psychological health and safety. I was at a company once that outsourced staff members to support higher education. Like, for example, staff members that would be an extension of the campus to call prospective students about their admissions applications to make sure they got their file complete. And so this one worker that I was working with, staff member, she had spent over an hour on the phone with this admissions applicant. And typically we would say you need to spend, no more than 5 to 10 minutes, walk through everything. We had a script. And she threw all that out the window and spent an hour on the phone. And so after that happened, we were kind of walking through the end of the day, and she had said, actually, this person, after the end of the conversation, so she didn't know anything about this throughout the conversation. She knew the person was very distraught and was just taking the time and really going extra beyond to help her. At the end of the conversation, she had shared that she was on the brink of suicide. And this was her last shot of getting in and making something for herself. And she'd had a horrible situation and just, a bad experience. So, those elements are so critical as well. We don't know where the other person's been walking before we get on the phone with them. So we got to think about that.
Yeah. And again, we should always assume that the person that we're talking with has had something happen before they met us. And not all of it was to their liking. Not all of it, because there isn't a person on the planet that hasn't experienced some form of trauma or another. Period. Period. It just doesn't matter. It is the human condition. So, but again, a lot of our systems assume, this person, I love this thing, so they're going to love it too. They're going to love the way I do it. It's going to be great. And if they don't, we somehow, and I listen to the kind of judgmental language we use. As I've shared with you, I was in higher ed professionally for about a year, and I was at a small institution who had started a football team a couple of years before I got there. They started the football team, primarily the president had done this before, to get more students. But when these students came on campus, all of a sudden the faculty, some of the faculty, not all, but some of the faculty were going, well, these aren't the students we're accustomed to, blah, 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 blah. Well, they may not have been, but you invited them here. If the students you want aren't coming here. That's why you started the football team. So if you're going to bring these students on, it is your responsibility to create an environment where they will stay. The same thing applies to a business. We need more workers. Well, you're going to have to create an environment where workers will want to come there and stay there, because otherwise they've got options. And frankly, one of the options that exists today, there are people who are opting out altogether, living in a van and having a YouTube channel. so they don't have to deal with the environment that has been created that just isn't safe for them. So it forces us all to be a little bit more competitive if we want to get people. And again, because people do have options, the safer and more comfortable and more, this sounds kind of mushy, but loving and supportive it is, the more they're going to do it because we're all kind of wired that way.
That's exactly right. And when we create and foster that type of environment in the education or in higher education sector, then we help to further prepare these students when they go out and start looking for jobs to realize, hey, you're interviewing that company just as much as they are interviewing you. And you need to be making sure that that company is not just going to promote your career path, but your well being as well while you are there working with them, whether it's from 9 to 5 or whatever that time frame is. That company has a responsibility also to ensure that while you are with them and working with them and under their care, that there's that total full well being, that sense of well being. And so students coming in need to be prepared to ask those questions to employers, to the hiring managers about what is your culture like, and how do you promote psychological health and safety and well-being for your employees. And that is also going to equip our incoming new workforce to be better at taking care of the next generation.
Right, absolutely. So yeah, as we start to creep to a close, one other question I want to ask before we, well, actually two, but I hear a lot, particularly from our generation, about the fact that these kids are just they're just different. They're kind of soft. And frankly, every generation says that. Every generation says that they're tougher than the other generation. um, So, in your view, in what ways are students very different, but in other ways, what ways are they the same?
So yeah, you're 100% right. We were the latchkey kids, or at home, and a lot of times had a lot of additional responsibilities on us. And like you said, the prior generation said, "Oh well, we had to walk up the hill both ways in the snow, do it from." So, I think that today's generation of students, the incoming students, they have a broader sense of intellect, especially in a global age where information is global and limitless. So they have much more expansive resources that are available to them to help feed in knowledge. So there's a lot more intellect, especially in the ability to use and leverage technology. So I think in that respect, there's a big difference. Also, I think that because of the socioeconomic, the events that have occurred, going all the way back to 9/11 and fast forwarding to where we are today, I think students coming in have a bit more thought and sensitivity to issues around peace and want people coming together. They're also more aware and more comfortable saying no. That is not how I'm going to do it. So I think in that respect, there's a lot of advances that I've seen in today's students. I was the one where it was, just grin and bear it, suck it up, because that's just how it is, and don't ask questions. So these students coming in, they're asking questions and they're wanting answers. So I think that's a big, big difference from the past generation.
Yes, absolutely. Wow. Well, I suspect that there are people who are watching this episode, who will watch this episode in the future, who will listen. Most of the folks who engage with this podcast do so by listening, but some of them are listening and going like, "Wow, how come that guy wasn't at my school when I went there?" or there may be folks out there who who want to learn more about, the work that you do, and may actually want to reach out to you. So share a little bit about how people can, continue conversations or start conversations with you about, academic excellence and student experience and all of that type of thing.
Yeah, so in my journey, it's taken me to a new pathway, which I'm loving. I started a company called Campus Journeys by Renaissance Campus Consultants. And basically, you can reach me at askearney at campusjourneys.com. And through that, I've also partnered with two great colleagues and friends of mine, all in higher education, one called Peak Performance, and the other one is Higher Digital. So Rob Cardelli at Peak Performance and Wayne Bouvier at Higher Digital, longtime colleagues of mine who also share the passion for creating positive change and better experiences for all people, students, faculty, staff, administrators. So I've been able to partner with them. And it's been a wonderful, wonderful experience. And I hope to have the opportunity to further engage with your viewers. If anything, just a connection on LinkedIn, sharing my thoughts. I'm always providing white papers and recordings of webinars. My next recording I'll be sharing on LinkedIn. So those are some ways to get in touch with me. And always, we're always connecting. So through you as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. So if you want to find Andy, find me and I'll find him. I'm happy to do that. Andy, thank you so much. This has been a wonderful opportunity to talk about psychological health and safety from a perspective that even some of my long-term viewers might think a little bit different, but it's just so connected. I mean, education is more than just about, books and tests and scores and intuition and all that type of thing. It is about the experience of the human being and how that institution or that education sets them up for not only productivity and success, but for a healthy and safe and very, very long life. And that starts with how they feel. So again, thank you very much for your contributions. I really appreciate it. So if you're watching or listening to this podcast for the first time, welcome. I hope something you've heard will bring you back in the future. Previous episodes of this podcast can be found at psychhealthandsafetyusa.com. You can watch, like, and subscribe, or even share the podcast on the Flourish DX YouTube page. And please do join the Psych Health and Safety USA movement by connecting and becoming a subscriber on LinkedIn. So until next time, stay tuned and look out for the next episode of the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast.
Tune in each week for new episodes of the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. If you have a story or know of one that needs to be told, reach out to us on LinkedIn or send an email to David at id2-solutions.com or go to the Flourish DX website at flourishdx.com. We'll see you next time.